What structural shift do you think will most reshape the AI industry over the next few years?
I think rather than the structural shift, it's more of a paradigm shift in terms of what you're looking at. I think largely, and we were just discussing amongst ourselves, I think two or three things that the AI has taught the industry, and I'll largely talk about service industry. A, the change that we are seeing is that we are seeing an increase in productivity, obviously, and that is coming in the IT services industry. But what we are seeing is also a realization of the facet of how much can we achieve through that objective, right? So people keep giving numbers in terms of 40%, 50% productivity. Can we be more pragmatic in terms of dealing with that particular shift in terms of productivity? Number one. Number two, I think there's a balance of trade coming up between positions like CTOs and CIOs, where I think there's a strategic intent to what we want to achieve within the organization, but also there's an innovation component that needs to get added in terms of what we want to do. Second, I think transformations become a big buzzword. Now, what kind of transformation? Are we transforming business processes? Are we looking at transforming the entire stacks for technology? That transformation is really being discovered. And the skill imperative is actually changing. IT services or services industry will very rarely now comment on generalist skills. It'll become more specialized in terms of what you do. Either you're a domain specialist who knows his or her domain and who knows how to apply AI into the system, or you are a specialist technologist who knows how to apply certain things. So those are structural changes that we're seeing largely coming up in the industry at this point.
Okay. Where do you see sustainable competitive advantage emerging for AI companies today?
Look, the sustainable competitive advantage is how do you work for the planet better, and how do you not get riled up in the hype of what you want to produce as larger models. And I think that's really what the India AI story is. Since we're sitting in India AI Summit, how do I make smaller models? How do I make models which understand domain context better? But how do I make sure that they are not using a lot of compute power in terms of what you wish to do? And I think that's the sustainable advantage in terms of companies. Number one. Number two, are we really looking at within India itself in terms of change of algorithms, right? Are we looking at the same algorithms over and over again? Are we looking at how do those algorithms change in terms of perspective? So those are things that we are really looking at in terms of, the sustainable facet. Energy is a big component. We are all, the kind of models that are running, there's a lot of energy that keeps getting accumulated. So what's that energy paradigm? So the question to be asked is quantum being one of those techniques and technologies that is more greener in terms of its implementation. How would that augment in terms of artificial intelligence and the work that is done in AI in terms of that? So those are some of the alternatives that we're looking from a sustainable standpoint.
Okay. What are the biggest misconceptions businesses still have about deploying AI?
Look, I wouldn't call them misconceptions. I would call them largely some reluctance in terms of trust, obviously. I would call them in terms of not doing a quantitative study and not a qualitative study around the same things, and saying, just looking at hearsay. So, for example, one of the biggest fallacies that we see is all things that we see today, AI is becoming more and more responsible. Well, it is. There are algorithms which are changing, but there's also another connotation that we have to make sure that the objective is met. And within that objective, what's the responsible part of AI, right? So that's one fallacy, number one. And that is what the misconception is. The other misconception is AI compute is becoming cheaper, so we can deploy AI for increase in productivity. Great stuff. Yes, it's possible. But what's your context? What's your objective? What tools are you using? What mechanisms would you apply? Is the second aspect in terms of what we do. I think the third misconception normally comes is once I apply AI, I would be sending a lot of data and there'll be a lot of hallucination. Well, that's another misconception that is coming in, where we can stop hallucinations to a certain extent. We can apply techniques like RAG or retrieval augmented generation. We can give some contextual grounding to AI as well. The other misconception is AI is becoming more responsible. Yes, but it's a big term at the end of the day. Right. There are fallacies on responsibility as well. We can solve the ethics and the bias problem. We still can't solve the explainability issues in terms of what we're doing. Right? So these are misconceptions which I feel as an organization, Tech Mahindra, we become more consultants for our job to actually take it to the customer in terms of how we solve it, right? How we solve some of these misconceptions.
Okay. What risks or bottlenecks could significantly slow industry progress as far as AI adoption is concerned?
I think one of the risks that you've already said is fallacies, right? And the other risk is not stepping in and taking the first step in for trying certain things out. There's always a slip between the lip and the cup if you apply it in a lab, but you don't take that lab structure into production and on scale. So how do you bridge that gap between the lab and the scaling part is largely where the industries will flop on. And there are hundreds of reasons for it. Proper techniques not being applied, proper grounding work not being done, the objective not being set up correctly, the ROI numbers all over the place in terms of what you want to do. So all of these are risks at this point in time. If the industry grounds itself, then these risks can be alleviated.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Malhotra.